The scream pierced through the afternoon air like a blade through silk, causing every parent within 50 yards of Maplewood Elementary's playground to freeze mid-conversation. Karen Whitmore lay sprawled on the rubberized surface beneath the spiral slide, her designer handbag contents scattered like broken dreams, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at the air as she wailed with theatrical precision. "He pushed me. That fat little monster pushed me down." Her voice carried across the playground with the force of a hurricane, each syllable dripping with calculated venom. Parents rushed toward the commotion, their faces etched with concern and confusion, while children stopped their games to stare at the unfolding drama. 12-year-old Marcus Chen stood frozen at the top of the slide, his round face flushed crimson with shock and embarrassment. The other children who had been playing nearby backed away slowly, as if his alleged crime might somehow be contagious. His mother, Lin Chen, pushed through the gathering crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tried to make sense of the chaos. "Marcus would never," Lin began, but Karen's theatrical sobs drowned out her words. "I was just walking by, minding my own business, when he deliberately shoved me. Look at my wrist." Karen held up her arm, already beginning to show the faintest hint of what could have been bruising, though it was impossible to tell if it was genuine or expertly applied makeup. She had always been skilled with cosmetics, a talent that served her well in her ongoing war against anyone who dared to exist in her perfectly curated world. The crowd around them grew thicker, parents murmuring among themselves in hushed, worried tones. This was Maplewood Hills, where nothing more dramatic than a disputed parking space usually disturbed the suburban tranquility. The Chen family had moved here just 6 months ago, seeking exactly this kind of safe, peaceful environment for their children. Lynn worked double shifts at the hospital to afford their mortgage, while her husband David managed the night shift at a local tech company. They were good people, hard-working and honest, who had saved for years to give their children the opportunities they themselves had never had. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I didn't push anyone. I was just going down the slide." His eyes darted nervously between his mother and the woman on the ground, confusion and fear warring across his young features. "Don't you dare lie to me, you little delinquent!" Karen's voice rose another octave, and several parents instinctively took a step back. She had perfected this performance over years of practice, fine-tuning every gesture, every sob, every accusatory glare. "I demand you call the police. This child is dangerous." Lin Chen felt the world tilting beneath her feet. She knew her son, knew his gentle nature, his tendency to apologize even when he wasn't at fault, his deep-seated fear of confrontation that stemmed from years of being the biggest kid in his class. Marcus wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone push a grown woman. But as she looked around at the sea of suspicious faces surrounding them, she realized that truth might not matter as much as perception. "Please, there must be some mistake," Lynn said, her accent becoming more pronounced under stress, as it always did when she was emotional. "Marcus is a good boy. He would never hurt anyone." "Mistake." Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "The only mistake here is that school letting violent children run wild on this playground. I could have broken my neck." She struggled to her feet with exaggerated difficulty, accepting help from several concerned parents who had fallen completely under her spell. Principal Anderson arrived on the scene, having been summoned by a parent who had called the school office. Margaret Anderson had been running Maplewood Elementary for over 2 decades, and she prided herself on knowing every student who walked through her halls. Marcus Chen was one of her favorites, quiet, studious, always polite, the kind of child who helped clean up after art class without being asked. "What seems to be the problem here?" Principal Anderson asked, her voice carrying the authority that came with years of dealing with playground disputes and parental drama. Karen immediately launched into her story, embellishing details with each retelling. How she had been innocently walking past the playground equipment when Marcus had deliberately and maliciously pushed her from behind, causing her to fall and sustain what she now claimed were serious injuries. She mentioned her expensive clothes, her delicate condition due to a recent medical procedure that no one could verify, and her shock that such a dangerous child was allowed to attend school with their precious angels. Principal Anderson listened patiently, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene. She had dealt with Karen Whitmore before. The woman had a reputation for creating drama wherever she went. Just last month, she had demanded the firing of a cafeteria worker who had allegedly given her daughter a smaller portion of dessert than other children. Before that, she had tried to get the crossing guard replaced because he had politely asked her to move her car from a no-parking zone. "Marcus," Principal Anderson said gently, crouching down to the boy's eye level. "Can you tell me what happened?" The boy's voice was barely audible. "I was playing by myself on the slide. I didn't push anybody. I didn't even know she was there until she started screaming." Tears began to roll down his cheeks, and his mother instinctively moved closer to him, her protective instincts in overdrive. "He's lying!" Karen shrieked, her performance reaching a crescendo. "This is exactly the kind of behavior I'd expect from—" She paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the Chen family, and everyone present could feel the ugly undercurrent of what she wasn't saying out loud. The silence stretched uncomfortably as parents exchanged glances, some beginning to recognize the familiar pattern of Karen's manufactured outrage, but others, newer to the community or simply caught up in the drama, seemed to be buying into her narrative completely. "I think we should call the police," Karen announced dramatically. "This child needs to be held accountable for his actions, and his parents need to understand that their lack of discipline has consequences." Lin Chen felt her world crashing down around her. She had worked so hard to build a life for her family in this community, to fit in, despite the cultural barriers and the subtle looks of suspicion she sometimes received. The thought of police involvement, of Marcus potentially facing charges for something he didn't do, made her feel physically sick. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "if you must call anyone, call my husband. We can sort this out without involving the authorities." "Oh no," Karen said with malicious satisfaction. "This has gone far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Your son needs to learn that actions have consequences." She pulled out her phone with dramatic flair, as if she were drawing a weapon. But before she could dial, a small voice piped up from the crowd. "That's not what happened." Everyone turned to see 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, a tiny girl with pigtails and grass stains on her school uniform. She had been playing on the swings nearby when the incident occurred, and, unlike the adults who had arrived after hearing the commotion, she had seen everything. "Emma, honey, adults are talking," Karen said dismissively. But Principal Anderson held up a hand. "Let her speak," the principal said firmly. "Emma, what did you see?" The little girl looked nervously at the crowd of adults surrounding her, but her voice grew stronger as she continued. "The lady wasn't walking by. She was standing there watching Marcus play. And then she just fell down. Marcus was already going down the slide. He never touched her." Karen's face flushed red with anger. That child is obviously confused. She's too young to understand what she saw. "I'm not confused," Emma protested, her small hands balling into fists. "You're lying. Marcus is nice. He always shares his snacks with kids who forget their lunch money." A murmur ran through the crowd as other children began to nod in agreement. Marcus was indeed known for his kindness, his willingness to help smaller children reach the monkey bars, his gentle nature that made him more likely to be bullied than to be a bully himself. Karen realized she was losing control of the narrative and doubled down on her performance. "I don't care what some mixed-up child thinks she saw. I know what happened to me. I'm calling the police right now, and I'm pressing charges. This family needs to be held accountable." As she dialed, Lin Chen felt a crushing weight settle on her chest. She thought about her husband David, who would be devastated to learn about this incident. She thought about Marcus, who was already struggling to fit in at his new school, and how this false accusation would follow him for years to come. She thought about their younger daughter Sophie, only 6 years old, who would have to deal with the whispers and stares of neighbors who would always wonder if the Chen family were the kind of people who raised violent children. The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, witness statements, and barely contained chaos. Officer Williams arrived on the scene with his partner, Officer Martinez, both experienced in dealing with playground disputes that had escalated beyond reason. They had seen Karen Whitmore's name in their reports before: domestic disturbances with neighbors over property lines, complaints about noise levels from children playing, and various other grievances that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Officer Williams took statements from everyone present, while Officer Martinez examined the scene. The rubberized playground surface showed no signs of a struggle, no scuff marks, or disturbed areas that would indicate a physical altercation. Karen's injuries, upon closer inspection, seemed remarkably minor for someone who claimed to have been violently pushed to the ground. "Ma'am," Officer Williams said carefully, "we've spoken to several witnesses, and their accounts don't seem to match your description of events." "They're all lying to protect that family," Karen insisted, her voice reaching new heights of indignation. "This is obviously some kind of conspiracy. These people stick together. You know how they are." The racist undertone of her words hung heavy in the air, causing several parents to shift uncomfortably. Officer Martinez, himself Latino, raised an eyebrow at Karen's barely concealed bigotry. "What we have here," Officer Williams continued diplomatically, "is a situation where the physical evidence and witness testimony don't support your claims. Without concrete proof of assault, we can't file charges against the child." Karen's mask of victimhood began to slip, revealing the calculating anger beneath. "This is ridiculous. I'm being discriminated against because I'm trying to hold these people accountable. I want to speak to your supervisor." The officers exchanged a look that said they had been down this road with Karen before. "Ma'am, you're welcome to file a formal complaint at the station, but based on what we've seen here today, we don't believe any crime has been committed." As the police prepared to leave, Karen made one final play for sympathy. "Fine. But when that dangerous child hurts someone else, don't come crying to me. I'll be filing a lawsuit against the school, the family, and anyone else who was involved in covering this up." With that parting threat, she stormed off toward the parking lot, leaving behind a crowd of shaken parents and children. Lin Chen gathered Marcus into her arms, both of them trembling from the ordeal, while Principal Anderson did her best to restore some sense of normalcy to the playground. But Karen's threats were not empty ones. Over the following days, she began a systematic campaign to destroy the Chen family's reputation in the community. She posted long, emotional rants on the neighborhood social media groups, describing her assault in increasingly dramatic terms and painting Marcus as a dangerous child who posed a threat to everyone's safety. She showed up at school board meetings, demanding policy changes that would allow for the immediate suspension of students who were credibly accused of violence, regardless of evidence. She organized what she called safety awareness meetings in her home, where she served wine and cheese to neighbors while spinning tales of the Chen family's alleged history of violence and antisocial behavior. The lies spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community. Parents began pulling their children away when Marcus approached on the playground. Phone calls that Lynn had been expecting from other families for playdates suddenly stopped coming. David reported that his co-workers had begun treating him differently, whispering among themselves when he entered the break room. Marcus, sensitive to the change in atmosphere around him, began to withdraw even further into himself. His grades, which had always been excellent, began to slip as he found it impossible to concentrate in class. He stopped raising his hand to answer questions, stopped volunteering for group projects, stopped engaging with his classmates entirely. "Why does everyone hate us?" "Mom," he asked one evening as Lynn helped him with his homework. The question broke her heart, because she could see the damage that Karen's lies were doing to her gentle, innocent son. "They don't hate us, sweetheart," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. "Some people they don't understand. But we know the truth, and that's what matters." But truth, as Lynn was learning, was a luxury that not everyone could afford. Karen's version of events was more compelling, more dramatic, more emotionally satisfying than the simple reality that sometimes people just fall down. Her story had villains and victims, clear moral lines and easy answers. The truth was messier, more complicated, harder to digest. Karen's campaign reached its peak when she convinced the school board to hold a special meeting to discuss playground safety and student accountability. She had gathered what she claimed were dozens of signatures from concerned parents, demanding action to protect their children from the dangerous element that had infiltrated their community. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the school's multipurpose room. Lynn and David Chen sat in the back row, feeling like defendants at their own trial. Marcus stayed home with his grandmother, spared from witnessing what promised to be another public humiliation of his family. Karen took the podium like a politician running for office, her appearance carefully calculated to project both vulnerability and strength. She wore a modest dress in muted colors, minimal makeup that somehow made her look both pale and determined, and a small bandage on her wrist that she had not been wearing the day of the alleged incident. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room, "I stand before you tonight, not as someone seeking revenge, but as a mother concerned for the safety of all our children." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation and emotional theater. Karen painted herself as an innocent victim of a vicious, unprovoked attack. She described Marcus as a troubled child, whose violent tendencies had been covered up by parents who were more concerned with avoiding responsibility than protecting our community. She brought up every playground incident from the past 6 months, the broken swing set that had actually been damaged by weather, the argument between 2 third graders that had nothing to do with Marcus, even a case of food poisoning that had affected several students and had been traced to a contaminated shipment of lunch meat. Somehow, in Karen's telling, all of these events were connected to the Chen family's presence in their community. "I'm not a racist," she said, though no one had accused her of being one out loud. "But I am concerned about the cultural differences that may be preventing proper discipline in some households. We have standards in this community, values that we've worked hard to maintain." The room was silent as she spoke, parents listening with rapt attention to her carefully crafted narrative. Some nodded along sympathetically. Others looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Lin Chen felt increasingly sick as she watched her family's reputation being systematically destroyed by a woman who seemed incapable of telling the truth. When Karen finished her presentation, she opened the floor for questions and comments. Several parents stood to share their own concerns about playground safety, though most were careful to speak in generalities rather than direct accusations. The message was clear: something needed to be done about the Chen family. Lin Chen, finally found the courage to stand and speak. "My son did nothing wrong," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "We are good people. We came to this community because we wanted our children to grow up somewhere safe and welcoming. We have done nothing to deserve this treatment, except raise a violent child who attacks innocent women." Karen shot back from the audience, her mask of civility finally slipping completely. "That's enough," said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the octogenarian who lived in the house directly adjacent to the playground. She was a fixture in the community, having lived in Maplewood Hills longer than anyone else present. Her late husband had been the principal of the high school for 30 years, and she was known for her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude. "Eleanor, please, we're trying to have a civilized discussion here," Karen said through gritted teeth. "Civilized Mrs." Hartwell's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "There's nothing civilized about what you're doing to this family, Karen Whitmore, and there's nothing civilized about the pack of lies you've been spreading through this community." A murmur ran through the crowd as all eyes focused on the elderly woman. Mrs. Hartwell was widely respected, and her words carried weight that Karen's dramatic presentations never could. "You don't know what you're talking about," Karen said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Don't I?" Mrs. Hartwell smiled grimly. "I've been watching you work your poison on this community for months now, Karen, stirring up trouble wherever you go, making mountains out of molehills, turning neighbors against each other for your own twisted satisfaction." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But this time, you picked the wrong family to target, and you made one crucial mistake." Karen's face had gone pale, though she tried to maintain her composure. "I don't know what you're implying, but—" "I'm not implying anything," Mrs. Hartwell interrupted. "I'm stating facts. You see, when you get to be my age, you tend to be home quite a bit. And when you're home, you notice things. Like the security camera I had installed last month after someone kept leaving their dog's mess in my front yard." The room went dead silent. Karen's eyes widened in genuine fear for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "The camera has a perfect view of the playground," Mrs. Hartwell continued conversationally. "Amazing technology these days. Crystal clear picture. Sound quality that picks up conversations from quite a distance. Very helpful when you want to know exactly what happened on a particular Tuesday afternoon." Karen stood frozen as the implications of Mrs. Hartwell's words sank in. Around the room, parents began to shift uncomfortably, sensing that the evening was about to take a dramatic turn. "Would you like to see the footage, Karen?" Mrs. Hartwell asked sweetly. "I have it right here on my phone. Amazing how everything fits in your pocket these days." That's not necessary," Karen stammered, but Mrs. Hartwell was already moving toward the front of the room, her phone in hand. "Oh, but I think it is necessary," the elderly woman said firmly. "This family has been put through hell based on your lies, and I think it's time everyone saw exactly what kind of person you really are." Mrs. Hartwell connected her phone to the school's projector system with the help of the principal, who looked both confused and intrigued by this unexpected development. Within moments, the video was playing on the large screen at the front of the room. The footage was indeed crystal clear. It showed Marcus playing alone on the slide, exactly as he had described. It showed Karen approaching the playground area, not walking casually past as she had claimed, but moving with obvious purpose. It showed her standing and watching Marcus for several minutes, her body language suggesting calculation rather than innocent observation. And then, clear as day. It showed Karen deliberately throwing herself to the ground near the slide, carefully positioning herself to make it appear that she had been pushed. There was no contact between her and Marcus. No interaction at all. Just a calculated, premeditated act of deception. The room erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs as the truth played out before their eyes. Parents who had been ready to condemn the Chen family minutes earlier now stared at Karen with disgust and disbelief. "You lying piece of," one father started to say before catching himself in the school setting. "How could you do this to a child?" another parent demanded, standing to face Karen directly. Karen looked around the room like a trapped animal, her face cycling through denial, anger, and finally, desperate defiance. "That video it's been doctored. This is all a setup. You're all in on this conspiracy." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was irrefutable, and the community's anger was swift and absolute. Parents who had been swayed by her emotional appeals now felt manipulated and betrayed. Children who had been present during the original incident began speaking up, confirming what they had tried to say before, but had been dismissed as too young to understand. "You tried to destroy an innocent family," Mrs. Hartwell said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "You tried to turn this community against good people, based on nothing but your own malice and prejudice. You are a disgrace." Karen's final performance was her most pathetic yet. She tried tears, then anger, then desperate rationalization. She claimed she had been confused, that she had genuinely believed Marcus had pushed her, that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. But the video evidence was too clear, and her previous weeks of calculated character assassination had revealed her true nature too completely. The meeting ended with Karen fleeing the building in humiliation, while parents surrounded the Chen family with apologies and expressions of support. Lynn and David accepted the apologies graciously, though the damage done to Marcus would take time to heal. The consequences for Karen came swift and severe. The video went viral on social media within hours, shared by outraged parents and community members who wanted to expose her behavior. Her employer, a prestigious law firm downtown, saw the footage and terminated her employment immediately, citing conduct unbecoming and the potential damage to their reputation. The Homeowners Association, which Karen had been trying to use as another weapon against the Chen family, voted unanimously to remove her from her position as chairwoman of the Community Standards Committee. Her neighbors, who had grown tired of her constant complaints and manufactured dramas, finally had the ammunition they needed to push back against her reign of terror. But perhaps most satisfying of all was Marcus's transformation in the weeks that followed. The boy who had been withdrawing into himself began to bloom again as his classmates and neighbors learned the truth. Parents who had been avoiding the Chen family made special efforts to include them in community events. Children who had been afraid to play with Marcus discovered what many had known all along, that he was one of the kindest, gentlest kids in their school. The playground incident became a turning point for the entire community. It forced residents to confront their own biases and assumptions, to question how quickly they had been willing to believe the worst about a family they barely knew. It sparked conversations about racism, both overt and subtle, and about the responsibility everyone shared in creating an inclusive, welcoming environment. Mrs. Hartwell became something of a local hero, though she dismissed such praise with typical dry humor. "I just did what any decent person would do," she said when interviewed by the local newspaper. "I told the truth. It's a shame that's considered heroic these days." The Chen family, meanwhile, found themselves embraced by their community in ways they had never expected. Neighbors who had previously offered only polite nods began inviting them to barbecues and block parties. Marcus was elected to the student council, and Lynn was asked to join the PTA board. David's co-workers, embarrassed by their previous cold treatment, went out of their way to include him in after-work activities. Karen Whitmore left Maplewood Hills 3 months after the playground incident, selling her house at a significant loss and moving to another state where no one knew her story. But the internet has a long memory, and her attempts to rebuild her reputation were hampered by the viral video that followed her wherever she went. The playground itself underwent some changes in the aftermath of the incident. The school board, with input from parents and community members, installed additional security cameras to protect both children and adults from false accusations. They also implemented new policies for handling playground disputes, ensuring that all witnesses would be heard and evidence would be carefully evaluated before any actions were taken. Marcus Chen continued to play on that same slide where Karen had tried to destroy his life. But now, instead of playing alone, he was usually surrounded by friends who had learned to see past surface differences to the kind, generous soul beneath. His mother would watch from nearby benches, chatting with other parents who had become genuine friends, rather than merely polite acquaintances. On quiet afternoons, when the playground was nearly empty and the late sunlight cast long shadows across the rubberized surface, Lin Chen would sometimes think about how quickly their lives could have been destroyed by one woman's calculated lies. She thought about other families who might not have been so fortunate, who might not have had an elderly neighbor with a security camera and the courage to speak the truth. The incident had taught her community valuable lessons about the power of assumptions, the danger of rushing to judgment, and the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. It had shown them that evil often wears the mask of righteousness, and that the most dangerous lies are often wrapped in the language of concern and protection. But perhaps most importantly, it had demonstrated the resilience of truth and the power of community when people choose to do what's right. Karen Whitmore had tried to turn neighbors against each other, to exploit fear and prejudice for her own twisted satisfaction. Instead, she had inadvertently brought them closer together, forcing them to confront their own biases and emerge as a stronger, more unified community. As Marcus grew older, he would sometimes tell friends about the day when a woman tried to frame him for assault, only to be exposed by hidden camera footage. He would speak about the experience with a maturity beyond his years, understanding even as a child that he had witnessed something important about human nature and the choices people make when they think no one is watching. The playground at Maplewood Elementary remained a place of joy and childhood wonder, but it also served as a reminder of an important truth, that in a world full of Karen Whitmores, ready to exploit fear and division for their own gain, it takes courage and community to stand up for what's right. Sometimes that courage comes from unexpected sources. An elderly woman with a security camera, a young child brave enough to speak the truth, or a group of neighbors willing to admit their mistakes and do better. In the end, Karen's calculated deception had backfired spectacularly, destroying her own life while ultimately strengthening the very community she had tried to tear apart. The playground she had chosen as her stage for manufactured drama became instead a symbol of resilience, truth, and the power of people to overcome their worst impulses and choose compassion over prejudice. And every time Marcus went down that slide, every time he heard the sound of children's laughter echoing across the playground, he was reminded that sometimes the good guys really do win, that truth really does prevail, and that, even in the darkest moments, there are always people willing to stand up and do what's right. That lesson, learned on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when his world almost fell apart, would stay with him for the rest of his life, shaping the man he would become and the values he would pass on to his own children someday. The playground had returned to what it was always meant to be, a place where children could play safely, where families could gather without fear, and where the only drama was the kind that comes naturally from the innocent conflicts and joys of childhood. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.